there, right? Rick Scott that was there before, and then obviously now this guy. They always take advantage of the fact that people want to live in Florida, right? And so they always try to. They're pro company friendly, right? So they're always gonna look out for what's the best interest for corporations versus what's the best interest of the people that live there, because they're never going to worry about a shortage of people living in Florida because everyone wants to live there. So that was the same thing with the housing crisis. I mean, in 2008, again, I don't remember much of that time, but I remember my parents like stressing out constantly.
Well, yeah, and it's because I really when we're analyzing today's issues or like historical issues, I feel like personal stories are like really or what teach people like what happened rather than the statistics or like the textbooks and stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
Um,
I mean, many people make decisions based on their own personal stories, right? Like,
yeah,
so like people donate to certain campaigns and people donate to certain foundations based on their own experiences, right? So it's you're right. You're absolutely right on that.
yeah, and um, so like down in did you? I know you're Cuban. Did you grow up? Were you born in Cuba and came to Florida, or were you born here in America?
I was born in Cuba. I came
Okay.
here in 1994. I was 4 years old when I came here, so I came very young.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I was born in Cuba.
And feel free to decline. How did you get here?
Yeah, no, I came here legally. My
Okay.
mom, met my father, or I guess my stepfather. I call my father because he raised me, but she met my stepfather, and he was already like a citizen here, and then they married. And so I came here legally.
Okay, yeah. So I know that's how a lot of people have done it. And I've always found it interesting the Republican Party, which is has a lot of anti-immigrant folks. Not everyone though. I mean, keep in mind George W. Back in 2006 was actually supported granting legal status to those who are here illegally. And
Yeah,
then I mean, John McCain used to be pro like um, giving amnesty to uh, to undocumented immigrants, and then like even Rudy, the now disgraced Rudy Giuliani, back when he was running for president in 2008. I remember he was banking on winning Florida. If he had won Florida, he could really because Florida was early in the primary before Super Tuesday. If he had won Florida, he would then like propel himself to like top tier status, and then
yeah,
would be close to winning the nomination. But he didn't come close to winning. McCain won Florida, and then Giuliani dropped out of the race right then and there. But like Giuliani, I remember was um like pro immigrant and pro like he said if you're here, even if you came here illegally, like if you want to contribute to our nation, you should be allowed to stay. Like I remember watching the news at the time, and like they were interviewing um farm workers down in Florida, and like and discussing with them like who would be best to be elected president so that they could like legally be here. But I mean, now the Republican Party's turned into the party of Trump, and they want to deport people who are not here legally.
yeah. No, I mean, and it's always an interesting kind of, because Cuba was always given like almost like special treatment when it came to like immigration,
Yes,
policies.
yes,
And most of it had to do kind of with the history between, the political history between U.S. and Cuba, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's only 90 miles, south of Florida, so it's literally just a drive, uh, like an hour drive from Florida, right? So, and it's interesting because Cuba was there's so many Florida was run by Cubans for so long. You know what I mean? Like that's just the reality of it. And so of course a lot of these Republicans had to be pro-immigration because all these Cubans, especially Florida being such a big swing state during elections, that they had to be pro-immigration, right? But I think at some point, if I had to point out exactly when, I would have to say maybe I want to say during Obama's administration. It kind of swang. Like Cubans are the most, and I can say this as a Cuban, they're the most entitled immigrants I've ever seen in my life. Like they kind of tend to forget their history a little bit once they land in this country, and they become very pro-Republican. It's like as soon as they become legal citizens, they're like all about like keeping immigrations at bay. And I think that came during like Obama's administration. I don't know what exactly would like triggered that mindset, but I saw that shift in Miami. Like I saw that shift going from like, you know we have to protect our families, and I want my family to come here and all this, to just like, well, once I'm here, that's it, no one else, this place is overrun and there's too many people here, so shut off immigration. And it was just kind of, it's crazy to see how like you go down to Miami now and it's so pro-Trump. Like so many Cubans are so pro-Trump, and I never understood that. Like I can understand some people voting for Trump and the reasons, but I never understood why Cubans go for Trump. A lot of it has to do with they're 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 scared of, a lot of the Republican Party uses the word socialism a lot when they describe the
Yep.
Democrat, right? And so I think that they're brainwashed to believe that the Democrats just want to turn this into like a socialist state. And of course, Cuba being, communist socialist, they're super against it, so they're going to be pro-Republican. So at one point Republicans started shifting this message that Democrats were socialists, and that's when they won over pretty much every Cuban, in Florida. So um it's interesting to kind of see that shift for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they've done that with Venezuela too, with Venezuelans.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's Venezuelans became huge, obviously, after everything that's been going on in their country. They obviously started immigrating towards Florida as well. So there wasn't a many. I think my girlfriend read me a statistic, I think this year, that there's like 1.6% Venezuelans in Miami, but it feels like a lot more when you're living down there. Let me tell you, it feels so much more. They taken over a whole neighborhood in Miami and everything, and you're absolutely right. So I mean, with everything going on in their country, I think socialism is such a scary word for those immigrants.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I first got involved in politics. I remember in the 2000 election. That's when I started really following it, because I mean, I
Yeah.
know we were, I come from a family of Democrats, and when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, it was Bill Clinton's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Like, and
Yeah.
the economy was doing well too. Like I just and like my parents were always talking about how great Bill Clinton was and how America is the best country in the world. And then in the 2000 election, because I know my parents really wanted Al Gore over George W. Bush, and then the
Yep.
whole Florida disaster. Um, and I remember, like, I remember as a kid, we felt so, it felt so unfair, because we really, to this day, we all still believe Al Gore really did win Florida.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
think he
yeah.
did?
I mean, I remember that. I mean, I was like what, 14 years old probably.
Sure. I was well, in 1989, I think we were 11. We just turned 11. I
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like, yeah, I was like, I remember being in middle school. That's what I remember. And I remember my teacher just doing like a fake election just to just to like get people involved in the politics as like a middle schooler. And I remember like not knowing anything about the election. I just voted for George Bush, and I remember bringing that back home to my parents. My parents were like, "How dare you?" You know, and I was like, "Oh, I'm 10 years old. I don't know what I'm doing."
Yeah.
And so it was my parents I remember like yelling at the TV in Spanish saying like that he won Florida. And I think that was the first time that Florida was like spotlighted as like this crucial swing state that people need to win over to like get major up in the election, right? Like that was the first time that like the recounts and the oh my god, it was insane. And now I think that was the first time people started paying attention to the electoral college system. Like I remember like having debates in middle school about it and like talking about it. I remember my civil teacher describing what the electoral college was, and all of us being like, "What do you mean our vote doesn't count?" You know, like, oh yeah, so
Yeah, but it was interesting. I remember I read in after the it was end of 2012, beginning of 2013. I read an alternative history novel titled 43 with an asterisk, and it's what Al Gore's presidency, like the first two
would
years
have
of his
looked like.
presidency, yeah, what it would have been like.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
it's a very short book. Like I had it on ebooks. Like I read it on my phone, and
And what did it say?
it said, well, he actually had a different take. His and I this really I never really thought about this before, but the author argued that um Elian Gonzalez, the fact that the
Mm,
Clinton administration was not able to
mm.
keep him here in Florida, instead he went back to his father in Cuba.
Cuba, yep.
Yeah, the author argued if the Clinton Gore administration had been able to keep Elian Gonzalez here, um, Cuban Americans in Florida who are anti-Castro would have voted for Gore instead of Bush. Like they like I feel like Bush and then I mean and I think the Bush campaign targeted Cubans and said and kind of argued that like if we were in if Bush had been the president, like he would have done more to lobby to keep Elian here. And and then he also argues, which I never really heard of that take before. But do you remember that too? I remember I was the Elian Gonzalez.
Yeah, I remember that whole accent. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Like it's I would have to really kind of think about that. That's an interesting take. Like, the whole thing, I mean, I remember that whole thing because it actually, funny enough, the raid of his house it was like less than a mile away from where my parents lived. So,
Oh,
I mean, like, so it was a huge deal in Miami for sure. Um, when the U.S. government like literally raided, the house to take the kid back, and the kid was hiding in the closet and all of that. So yeah, I definitely remember that. I remember my parents obviously wanting the kid to stay. Um, but I don't know if I agree with the fact that anything would have changed if it was a Republican president at the time. You know what I mean? Like Republicans are always pro. I don't know. I don't know. That's an interesting take.
yeah, the author actually, like, this is an alternative novel. The author argued if Ilian's mother had survived, like that would have
Oh, for sure.
given, yeah, that would have given the standing of Ilian staying in the U.S. a lot stronger, and then so he would have actually been living in Florida instead of back home with his father in Cuba. But um, and in the long run, Ilian going back home to his father actually, for at least for Ilian and his family, it did end up working well. Like he grew up down there, and I remember in my conflicts in modern society class, senior year of high school, we had to pick an event of the 21st century, and then share it with the class, and then
Yeah.
so one group picked the Ilian Gonzalez um, case, and they said like Fidel Castro actually came to his birthday parties and stuff, and like brought. brought presents, and then people actually like kind of had a when they said that, the whole class kind of had a very uneasy laugh. But they but if he argues that enough Cuban Americans would have voted for Gore in 2000 instead of Bush, and then that actually would have pushed Florida to Gore comfortably. So like the whole recount wouldn't have mattered. Like Gore would have won Florida by like comfortably enough so that like any kind of uncertainty or anything would have been irrelevant. But um and then if you look at Cuban American voters, Obama actually for a Democrat, Obama won the highest amount of the Cuban American vote.
Mhm.
I think of all like in decades. Like I know he won a little over 40% of the Cuban vote in 2008. And then in 2012, he only lost like by like 3 percentage points the Cuban vote. It was like 50% Romney, 47% Obama. So Obama got relatively close, but then they've ever since then the Cuban Americans have swung back Republican. What do you think Obama did or said that got a lot more Cuban Americans to vote for him?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, he opened up conversations, diplomatic conversations with Cuba. He
Yeah,
was, he was the first president since like the 60s to visit Cuba. Not even. I think it's before that. I think since like the 1930s, he was the first president to visit Cuba. He opened up the embassy there. He, opened up travel, made travel easier for Cubans and U.S. citizens to visit Cuba. That was easy. I mean, the moment he did all that, and to be honest, he even removed Clinton's wet foot dry foot policy, which was actually a lot of Cubans were pro for, right? So he did a lot. Obama was an amazing president for Cubans, like phenomenal president for Cubans. And so yeah, opening up that and talking to Raul Castro right after Fidel's passing. Fidel passed away during Obama's administration. There
yep.
was a huge celebration in Miami after that. His brother Raul took over. Obama started having conversations with Raul. Raul was a lot more lenient in having conversations with the U.S. and the economy in Cuba actually flourished a little bit after all of that. So yeah, absolutely, Obama did the right thing on that.
Definitely. And then also he's opened up some new trade avenues. Like the reason why we have Cuban cigars now and Cuban rum is because of the Cuban thaw. And
Yeah.
then you know not that people should be, I mean I support people's rights to decide what they want to put into their own bodies, but another thing though with Cuba that like yes, despite being a communist country, like and not being and therefore having growth has been stifled a lot. They have I have heard that they have a pretty efficient healthcare system. If and then I also believe that they developed Cuban scientists down there developed a lung cancer vaccine or like one of the most advanced lung cancer treatments. So it's like maybe the U.S. It's ironic, Cuban cigars are coming here, but we could also get the lung cancer vaccine as well. So if you smoke too many of the Cuban cigars, then you can get the lung cancer treatment to make up for
Balance
smoking those
that
Cuban
out.
cigars.
I mean, that's interesting. I didn't hear about the lung cancer treatment, but it will make sense because there's so many people that smoke cigars in Cuba, so it'll make sense that they will prioritize that over anything else. But yeah, no, we definitely have one of the best doctors in the world. We have one of the top, um, in the medical field. We have one of the top educations in the world. The issue is that we don't doctors in Cuba are known for being as good as they are because they do the best with what they have because they don't have a lot. um, and so they'll treat anything with anything that they can find pretty much. And I remember visiting Cuba to go see my grandfather last year, and I was talking to his doctor. His doctor was like my age, like 30 something, and like super like just knowledgeable on his condition and everything like that. And uh, it's because that, that's one thing I would say. I hate saying this, and it hurts every fiber of my being saying this, but that's one thing that Fidel did right. Was the education system in Cuba just became like world renowned. Most of it had to do with the socialist idea of it being free and available to everybody, right? um and most of it had to do with the fact that they brought in experts from other countries to kind of teach and develop, the education system. The issue comes with the fact that they don't pay their doctors much because their doctors are technically government employees, right? Being a socialist country, so they don't pay their doctors much, and so a lot of doctors flee the country. um and then on top of that, they don't finance it much, right? So again, like I said, they do their best with what they have, but they're using equipment that's normally donated by by other countries to them. They can't even purchase their own equipment because they don't
What
have that kind
countries are
of resource.
donating the equipment? Is it Russia? Because I know even during the Cold War, they were strong allies, and they've stayed
Strong allies,
strong
yeah.
allies. So is it the Russians that are donating the equipment?
So Russians, it's private organizations in the U.S., right? So it's kind of a mix. Even other, Latin American countries, right? But it's mostly Russia and private organizations in the U.S. that donate kind of their private equipment.
So it's like, I mean, it shows it illustrates the greatness of Cubans that they've been able to have such a solid healthcare system, but it's like a trade-off because, I mean, a doctor is a very noble profession. I mean, doctors should make more money than most other professions,
Yeah.
but it's like, so it's kind of unfair to the Cuban doctors.
Oh no, 100%. I remember when I was talking to my grandfather's doctor. She's making equivalent to what I want to say. What was it? She's making equivalent to like $60,000 a year in American dollars, like, which
Hmm.
is not a lot.
No.
She's doing better than other Cubans, but still not where you think a doctor should be. And she's still struggling to like feed her own family sometimes, as a doctor, right? Which kind of blows my mind. Her husband, who works in foreign relations, so he works for like a private company in Cuba, which are rare, but he works for a private company and he makes, he goes to other countries, like other communist countries like China and even Russia to open up trade. He makes like significant more than her, and that's how they're able to survive. But her as a doctor, she even thought about quitting for a while there because she's not making enough as he is. And we talked about if she escapes to this country, she'd be making 10 times as more. So yeah, definitely not.
Wow. Um, s- one second. I
Yeah,
gotta,
no worries.
I gotta, do something real quick. I'm upgrading my Zoom. You're actually you're only the I've only done 3 episodes. This is only my third episode of my most recent podcast. So
That's awesome.
congrats. Yeah, congrats on being one of the OGs
Oh geez.
of being on the podcast.
Happy to help out, man. Happy to
Yeah.
help out. I'm glad you're pursuing it. I've been wanting to start a podcast, but I just haven't had the energy or time or commitment to do it. So, hey, good for you for starting out.
Yeah. Um
That's a nice mic you got in front of you too.
Yeah, I actually with my credit card rewards points, I was actually able to purchase it for free. So
Nice.
that's another pros and cons of credit card debt. Like there's the con is that it can rack up quickly, and then there's also the interest rates. But um, the pros are if you can pay it off, you can get stuff like this for like much cheaper.
Definitely.
Um, but have you ever read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn?
No.
He really, I mean, his um his take on stuff is like really it completely uh it's completely different than like the narrative you've heard about with like US history. Like Howard Zinn pretty much argues that like every throughout American history, like the US has done like so many like evil things. Like I know there's some stuff we acknowledge that of bad things that we've done, but like he argues that like he gives all these like details about like in World War II, for example, like the United States is viewed as the heroes, and I think we should still be viewed as the heroes, but like
Mhm.
he discusses about how when we were bombing Nazi Germany before D-Day, a lot of like he details all the civilians they got killed by the US bombs. And it's but like Howard Zinn also is kind of is like sympathetic to people like Fidel Castro. Just one moment, let me get my
Yeah, no worries.
but he has like he has a whole chapter about how Fidel Castro is actually like should be viewed as a hero, not as a
As
as a
a
menace. I mean, and I feel like it's like if you're presented with an essay question, Fidel Castro, hero or menace, what side would you take and what arguments would you give?
I would take both sides, in the sense that you gotta look at the history behind it. I remember in high school, I remember my English teacher asked the class to write a paper about charismatic leaders, right? Everyone always picks the usual, right? You have Martin Luther King, you have Gandhi, you have like Abraham Lincoln, right? Like these famous like good guy heroes. I actually chose to pick the opposite way, and I picked Fidel Castro
Hmm.
because people think charismatic leader means they're the good guys. No, it just means that you were able to get a mass number of people to follow you, right? And I remember I got a lot. Can I curse on this podcast?
What's up?
Can I curse on this podcast?
Sure. Yeah. It's fine. Oh, yeah. That's fine.
Well, I got a lot of shit from my class on that, and I was like, but he is a charismatic leader if you look at his history, right? Like you had Cuba being considered one of the jewels of the Caribbean in the 1920s all the way through the 1950s, right? Especially during the Prohibition era. A lot of Americans were going to Cuba. It was a capitalist country. It was thriving. It was doing amazing things in the Caribbean. It was just very corrupt, right? It was just a lot of corruption happening, and hence why the people of Cuba weren't seeing a lot of that money being reinvested in them. Hence, what then Fidel Castro comes in and starts this guerrilla movement to fight against this corrupt government, right? And amasses a large amount of followers, and then partners up pretty much with the U.S. government to overthrow the current government of Batista, and is successful at it. They were just farmers with pitchforks, right? So it's very similar to like the American Revolution, right? Like the Cuban Revolution was very similar. There was just these farmers and people just with barely any sort of money, any sort of equipment. They were being given AK-47s by the American government, sneakily, and using guerrilla tactics, and it was just so of course. And then when he won, right, in 1959, the Cuban Revolution, he was hailed as a hero by his people because again he fought against this corrupt government, like things that like Republicans talk about all the times, right? People fight, take, saying like, oh, you can't revoke the Second Amendment because that's how we're gonna fight against corrupt government, right? And so he did that. He was actually able to accomplish that, and of course he was viewed as a hero, right? And in time, speaking of talking about evil things that the American government has done, and I just want to preface, I love the US and I love everything they've accomplished, but they have done some fucked up shit in their history. And I would say the Cuban US relations would be so much better if they didn't try to like assassinate Fidel Castro. He had a good relations with the US. He just What happened was he took back a lot of the US owned businesses. Once he won the revolution, he took back a lot of the US owned businesses that were in Cuba, and the U.S. didn't like that. They helped the U.S. helped him by giving him a lot of weapons and trained soldiers during the revolution. So, but then he went against the U.S. government by taking away a lot of their businesses after he won, and the U.S. didn't like that, and so that's when the hostilities started. U.S. was pretty much like, dude, we helped you, and now you're taking this away from us. And he's like, well, thank you for helping us, but this is my country, and I don't want foreign power to take over because that's how this whole thing started, right? And hostilities started, and then the Bay of Pigs, and the attempted nation on attempted assassination on him, and he just became very just like against U.S. government and looking over his shoulder every second. And that's when he said, you know what, screw you guys, I'm gonna go with your enemies, with the Soviet Union, right? Um, so in that sense, it's like he can be seen as a hero. However, he was so, how can I say this? He was always looking over his shoulder with, again, with U.S. being only 90 miles away, that he had to turn over to his Soviet Union, and then he became a communist. It became a communist regime, and then he started really not focusing on the right things. Cuba was actually thriving for a while until the Soviet Union fell. And once the Soviet Union fell, they weren't getting a lot of funds, they weren't getting a lot of resources, um, and he had to allocate a lot of those resources, and he became a bit selfish and greedy, and he became an asshole, and he started murdering people to protect his power, and that's when things really started shifting for him as an image. Was when the Soviet Union fell. So again, I would argue in that paper that it's both good and bad. Like I think what's that quote from The Dark Knight? You either die a hero or you live long enough to to become a villain. That's exactly
Yep.
what happened to him, right? Like
Right.
if he would have been killed during the Cuban Revolution, he would have been this like great leader that many of us, even in the U.S., would like look up to and idolize. But then he became a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Like always looking over his shoulder, very like always cautious. He had food tasters, right? People tasting his food to make sure it wasn't poisoned, and like he just became obsessed with like staying alive and keeping power, that he became the villain. So I would argue both sides.
Yeah. I mean, so it's like it could be argued that he was an efficient leader until the late 80s, early 90s, but then he became murderous. Like, or he had, sure, well, I mean, he had been, I mean, yeah, I mean, he had been murderous prior to that, but like he didn't really become like a brutal dictator until the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he was a great military tactician, but then when it came to the politics side of leadership, I think he kind of failed in that aspect, and he relied heavily on listening to his close circle of people, and his close circle of people, unfortunately, were kind of assholes, right? So, Che Guevara being a good example, right? Che Guevara is considered this symbol of rebellion, right? And he was Fidel's his right hand man during the revolution. A lot of things. that Cuba is known for, things like the education system, it can be credited to Che, giving Fidel guidance on that. Um, but again, Che was very much a Marxist and he was very much a communist, and he was the one that pretty much convinced Fidel to be part of the Communist Party. So it was one of those situations where he was a great military tactician, but when it came to politics, he let his ego get in the way, and it just didn't fare well for the Cuban people, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting how he's that's similar to so many other like historical figures and like I mean Simon Bolivar like was a great military commander. He liberated the present day countries of Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, um, Peru, like Ecuador, and like the thing is like, but when he tried to govern all those places, govern that entire new liberated um like nations, he really like was described as corrupt and he
Yep.
wasn't able to do it. And
Yeah.
then
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because people always I like learning about like the what ifs of history, right? Like the what if this, what if that, right? And one of my favorite things to read about is like what if George Washington didn't just resign from presidency, right? Like would he have become this like, because again, he was a general of the Continental Army and then became president, and then after 4 years said, I'm done. And some people argue that he would have been a dictator. He would have been, King George Washington, and things would have looked a lot of different. And so, yeah, I think these great leaders and generals and military tacticians don't know how to handle the politics side of things, unfortunately.
yeah, I mean George Washington, that's why George Washington said like I'm stepping down after 2 terms, like all American presidents should do this in the future. Like and I think if you see what Fidel Castro turned into, that's an argument for why
Exactly.
someone shouldn't lead a nation for more like 30 years or more. Um, but I mean, another one is American leader Ulysses S. Grant. Once again, great general, but as a president, he really did not know what he was doing. I mean,
Yeah.
he was elected because people liked him and he was a Civil War hero, but he really, as president, he was just completely, that just was not the right place for him.
Yeah, that's actually a good example. Yeah, Ulysses S. Grant, great Civil War general, was the one that could say that won the Civil War for the Union, but terrible president. So
I mean, another thing that I wanted to talk about with Cuba is that if you look at like the how Africans have been the injustices they've experienced over the past several centuries in Cuba. I mean, they were brought there as slaves to work on plantations, and I've read that pre-Castro Afro-Cubans were generally at the at the lower end of society, but Castro promised freedom and better economic opportunities to Afro-Cubans, and some analysis argued that he did fulfill that promise. Have you heard about that?
yeah, I mean, like any country, we always have our fair share of racism, right? Cuba is no exception to that, and so plenty of Afro Cubans, right? Slaves were brought here by the Spanish, right? When they took over Cuba, and they kind of stayed around until the Spanish Cuban Revolution, right? In the 1800s. So I've never. I mean, again, I was born in 1990, right? So well past Castro's takeover, but I never really had seen or any issues with Afro Cubans. They're kind of considered equals. Now, I would say that there is a level of almost hierarchical in Cuba in terms of like Afro-Cubans are kind of on the lower end, right? They're normally the poorest, right? And then you have those who are descendants of Spanish background that have nicer things. I mean, not that. I mean, Cuba's a very poor country, so when I say nicer things, it's not that big of a gap. Um, but I have noticed that I remember talking to my mom about it. That I remember as a kid saying, "Oh, these darker skinned Cubans are like the more poorer than these lighter skinned Cubans," and she pretty much told me that's because of their history and the fact that they were slaves, and then through generational like struggles, they now at least are free, but they don't have the nicer things like those that were descendants from the Spanish, right? So I think it has a lot more to do with generational wealth, right? In Cuba, I come from a Spanish descent. My great grandfather was from Spain. My brother, on the other hand, is Afro-Cuban. So my brother is darker than me. Like you would never even think we're brothers. Um, but we grew up pretty much the same. So that's what I know personally. From regarding that subject.
Yeah, because did you also I remember I didn't learn this until AP American History my junior year of high school, the Ostend Manifesto. That
Yeah.
was yeah, the southern politicians in DC wanted to invade and colonize Cuba and go like in so that they could expand the amount of output that slavery was that American slavery was generating. But then anti-slavery folks in Congress prevented it.
Yeah, the Olsen Manifesto, uh, that to be honest, I think that would have been amazing for the U.S. government to take over Cuba. Originally, they were going to buy Cuba from Spain, but a lot of plantation owners, a lot of slave owners were once they found out about it, they were totally against it, um, because obviously their wealth would have been decreased. So the US was thinking about kind of doing it forcefully. I always wondered, like, I'm like, man, like it would have been amazing for the US to kind of just take over Cuba because it's literally right there. Like it's so close. Like you could, and sometimes I remember from the Key West, I would, take a boat out just like 30 minutes out into like the water, and you can literally see the shadows of Cuba just 30 minutes out from Key West. You know what I mean? Like so it would have been amazing. It just sucks that the US never went through it. They attempted what, I think twice to take over Cuba, so both times failed. So I think at one point US just said screw it. It's not worth the effort.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you like we got Puerto Rico, and it's just like it's right, like it's like right there would really be like if Cuba were a U.S. state, and I wonder, I really makes you wonder. But if you noticed, the past couple of years, there's been a lot of protests down in Cuba because they want like a free speech and free press, and they were really getting big, but then they
Mhm.
seem to have died down. Now that Marco Rubio's been tapped as Secretary of State, do you think the U.S. will, the incoming Trump administration will try to push, maybe even like a military invasion to try to like help the people who want free press and free speech, like take over the government and establish a government where there is free press and free speech?
No, to put it lightly, and I'll tell you why. Because relations with Cuba became worse with Trump, right? Like after Obama, um, things opened up, and then Trump reversed a lot of that, including closing the embassy in Cuba again. And so now, and then restriction travel to only Havana. and putting embargoes that unfortunately Biden kept in place. Trump is not the biggest fan, which is again odd to say when there's so many Cubans that support Trump, but Trump is not very. I mean, Trump was the one that labeled Cuba as a terrorist state. Um, and so Marco Rubio being, Trump's puppet, I think Marco Rubio will definitely try, being from Cuban descent himself, having that conversation with Trump. But I think Trump is very right, focused on the American people first. And I definitely don't think uh, anything will happen out of that. If I'm being honest, I mean, maybe Cuban relations would improve, but um, yeah, I don't think anything will really happen out of that, even with Marco Rubio taking over.
Because I know one of the Trump administration's citations for why they were rolling back the U.S. Cuban thaw, which I strongly disagree with, is that the present day Cuban government was supporting Maduro in Venezuela.
Venezuela, yeah,
But that's not, you need to look at the big picture, though. And that's the Trump
exactly.
administration is not doing that.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing with Venezuela, right? I understand it, but I not to the extent that Trump did it, right? Like I feel like it could have been handled much better. Um, especially that Cuba wasn't doing anything to hurt the U.S. while they're supporting, everything that was going on in Venezuela. So like, why take it to that extent? I don't know, especially knowing. But then again, we know that Trump is not a big book reader. So I'm like, if you would have known the history of the Cuba U.S. relations, you would have known that putting embargoes up and restricting travel and hurting the economy of Cuba. Cubans are very proud people. That would have not done anything to kind of change their mind, So yeah, I don't know. I think it could have been handled better.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree. And also, your Senator Rick Scott just introduced a bill that's passed the House, and he's pushing. It's called the Bolivar Act. He was just on X. He was posting about this how he wants to put a $100 million bounty on Nicolas Maduro.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I mean, is there a push? Do you think? Do you know any Venezuelans in Florida who would support the U.S. like launching an intervention in Venezuela to take down Maduro the same way we took down like Saddam Hussein in Iraq?
Yes, I know a few Venezuelans that are in support of that. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the same reason, people say we invaded Iraq, right? Is oil. I mean, it's the export of oil, right? Venezuela has one of the largest exports of oil in the world. So, um, there's always it's. I mean, that's the main reason, right? We would do it, and then and in a way, I don't know. I just think it's a little hypocritical to say, Americans first, other countries second, and then we're thinking of, invading and helping, revolt again in another country that's nowhere near us, right? Like Venezuela is nowhere near us, and of course we would benefit out of it, right? Again, with being such a large export of oil. Um, but it's just Republicans are so anti like foreign affairs that like now Rick Scott, in my opinion, was not a very good governor in Florida.
Yeah, he only like I mean he narrowly won in 2010. In 2010, keep in mind that was the Republican wave, and he only narrowly won. And then in 2014, I've always liked Charlie Crist.
Yeah,
And I was so disappointed. I thought Charlie Crist was going to beat Scott in 2014. And like, I know it wasn't looking good for Democrats in 2014, but like I thought Crist was going to make that comeback, but he fell just short. And then um but and I read Charlie Crist's book too about how it's an autobiography, and then it's called The Party's Over, like why I switched from a Republican to a Democrat. And he discusses, Chris too said like in when Scott took over after him in 2011, Scott took a wrecking ball to Chris, a lot of Chris accomplishments, which is really unfortunate. Like I've heard, like Chris actually said, worked to lower the costs of utilities in Florida.
Mhm.
But like Scott basically believes that like, not like non-government intervention is what will bring down price. But I've heard that that's caused the utilities to skyrocket down there. Is it true that the cost of electricity is a lot more expensive down there compared to here?
Oh yeah, yeah. The cost of utilities have definitely have skyrocketed in the last, like, 5 years or so, and it's FPL, like, FPL is the electric utility company. The FPL stands for Florida Power Line, and they're the company that runs pretty much all the electricity in the state, and they have almost a monopoly on electricity, and it's ridiculous how much the price has increased drastically in the last 5 to 8 years.
So why are Floridians still voting for Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis when they're not bringing down the cost?
It's very simple. They're Republican, right? Again, it's this. Look, I hate to say it, but the Cubans are not the smartest people down there. They're not the most educated people down in Florida. And they're very good. Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis are very good in deflecting blame, right? And they're very good at blaming others for their failures. And Cubans eat that shit up.
Well, not just Cubans, a lot of other Floridians.
Well, mostly. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's. I mean, Florida is a red state, you know, except for like Orlando and Tampa. So, um, and so it's just they're so good at just reflecting blame, and Cubans believe it. And again, it's this socialist. Like every time I get into a conversation with any Cuban down there, they bring up the exact same arguments, and that's, well, socialism. I don't want socialism in this country. And I'm like, who the fuck said that socialism is coming? But again, it's this message that Republicans have sent out to Cubans that Democrats are socialist, and again, Cubans just believe that. My own father, voted for Trump in 2016, and then I had a debate with him, when the elections were coming in 2020, and he did not vote for Trump in 2020, and then he did not vote for Trump this election. So obviously he saw kind of, I guess, how things don't get better with Trump. But it was a debate of exactly that. It was just a debate of ideology more than actual policies, right? Like that's what it just comes down to. It's this, Democrats want more government intervention, which leads to some socialism. And I'm like telling my father, I'm like, you're literally living on Medicare and Social Security. You're retired. Those are literal socialist ideals. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like this country is not full of socialist ideas. So let's be a little bit more open to some of these, taking care of everybody versus just taking care of me ideology. And it's a lot of debates on, again, ideology versus actual policy. And Ron DeSantis does an amazing job. He's so good at, doing things to make himself look amazing in the public's eyes. Like doing like public stunts. He's so good at doing public stunts that make himself look so good in the Republican Party, but in reality he's so bad when it comes to like certain policies and everything like that are more private, right? And people don't really follow those type of things. They follow what's on the news, right? When Ron DeSantis sends a tons of immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, and dumb political stunts like that, people just eat it up down there in Florida, unfortunately. And that Republican title goes a lot further for not just Cubans, but so many immigrants down there in Florida. And Florida is still run mostly by immigrants. So that's why they still vote for people like that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I mean, so that's why it's so hard to like get someone to change them to change their mind about who to vote for. And I mean, do you think maybe the way to change things in Florida would be through the ballot initiative process? I mean, and it's unfortunate too the because I love ballot initiatives. I love Massachusetts has ballot questions every election cycle where people vote directly on stuff. And I
Hmm.
know most states have ballot initiatives. Not all states do, but the problem with Florida is they have ballot initiatives, but among the ballot initiative states, they're the only state where you have to have 60%, not 50%.
Yep. I mean,
Who made that rule? Like was that
I don't know who made that rule. I don't know the history behind it. I mean, it's one of those things that I agree. I think the it's ridiculous that even this past election, Florida couldn't, they wanted to legalize recreational marijuana and they got 57% of the votes and it still didn't pass because it has to be the majority of 60. And now actually conversations are being held about that and removing that initiative of making sure that it's the majority, not the 60% minimum. So um, I'm glad at least, I think sometimes it takes something as major as recreational marijuana getting 57% of the vote but still not passing for people to wait a minute. What is this, right? Like
yeah. I mean, same thing with enshrining reproductive rights into law.
yep.
And like that had 57%, but like it's still um the draconian abortion law that the Florida
Yep.
legislature passed and DeSantis signed into law is still law because but 50 at least 57% of Floridians disagree with it, but they didn't get it because of the 60% threshold. But um I think if for progressives and Democrats in Florida, if they want to enact marijuana legalization and reproductive rights, they got to run a candidate who's going to um, not just endorse that, but like really campaign on that, saying like, if I get into office, um, like I will work with the legislature to get these done. But then again, Charlie Crist did that in 2022 when he got clobbered by
Yeah,
DeSantis.
he got destroyed.
It's like you gotta like, and I watched the debate between Crist and DeSantis too. Crist really did a great job too. It's just I feel like DeSantis's cult of personality was just too strong.
Yeah, I mean, Ron DeSantis definitely has like a following, a huge following down in Florida, and if I mean, I'm pretty sure if Trump wasn't running, he'd probably be the primary candidate for the Republican Party. In this election cycle. Uh, but ultimately, like it's one of those situations where again, from the kind of things that I've seen on the ground level, maybe this now might be. I don't want to generalize all like immigrants down in Florida, but from what I've seen on the ground level, they really try to follow in American footsteps and American ideologies, and then a lot of Americans down in Florida are right wing conservative, right? So a lot of immigrants kind of followed that, and so many of these things like abortion and recreational marijuana, especially the abortion. It's funny to hear some of my friends talk about it, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm not against abortion rights. I just don't like the idea of it being legalized." And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like, I don't understand that train of logic. Like, so I think more a candidate who runs more like, you know, look, we don't want government intervention, right? I'm Republican. We don't want government intervention. I'm against abortion, but we don't want government to be involved in people's everyday lives. If that's the message, right? When it comes to something like abortion rights, I think you would see a lot more people swing towards the legalization of abortion or whatever you want to call it. But you need I mean, it's crazy to see how Republicans, even those who are pro-choice, don't speak out on it, because again, Republicans are, that's their party, right? It's the pro-life party. So but again, if you have a candidate who just says, we're a party of anti-government intervention and abortion, giving the rights back to the people when it comes to abortion is what we are a party that's all about, then I think that would go a lot further down in Florida than someone who just says, no, pro-choice all the way, right?
Yeah. Um, it's like I think you need to argue that, they like I remember, I mean, Republicans have always argued that we need to completely privatize healthcare, but which I disagree with. I think
Yeah.
but like also privatize healthcare decisions. I mean, it's like I think it's similar to how like euthanasia, for example, a lot of social conservatives are fighting tooth and nail against it. But my argument is, if yes, I mean we have freedom of religion. If you believe that you're not meant to leave this earth until God naturally calls you home, like so be it. But there's a lot of other people who elder and a lot who don't want to, spend months suffering in pain. Like there's a lot of other people. I mean, my three grandparents, they all they passed away with natural causes, but they always told us growing up, like we don't want to be kept alive through feeding tubes and machines, like and stuff. Like that should be therefore, you
Personal
know,
choice.
yeah. So therefore, euthanasia should be allowed. Because I know in Massachusetts in 2012 we voted on it and it narrowly failed. But the thing is, like Massachusetts being a predominantly Catholic nation state, like if death with dignity passed in Massachusetts in such a heavily Catholic area, like so goes the nation. But since then, though, in 2012, only Colorado and Washington had death with dignity laws. Now it's expanded to California, Colorado, New Jersey, Vermont. Like it's really expanded. But I think the argument with abortion rights should be like no woman who gets an abortion is happy about it. But there are times where at 15 weeks it was discovered the baby's skull was cracked and that giving birth would, not only it would might actually make it so that like that woman wouldn't be able to give birth in the future. Like
Yeah.
it's much more complicated than like um and stuff. So like we gotta have individual decisions, but
It,
the present day Republican Party isn't there though.
Well, and it blows my mind why in like people's decision is even up for political votes. You know what I mean? Like it's like a good example is organ donation, right? I'm an organ donor, and
Me
you have to
too.
opt in to be an organ donor. It's on my driver's license. Why can't that be just any decision that we have when it comes, especially when it comes to medical decisions, right? Like, if you want to opt in to be euthanized, then fucking opt in to be euthanized. If you need to get an abortion because it's a risk to your health, and or you just don't want the baby because God forbid you were raped or anything like that, then that's a personal decision. Why are we getting involved? Like growing up, funny enough, like you always hear, people always say that, like, you grow up Democratic and then you turn Republican as you get older. I
Yep.
was the opposite. I grew up Republican, very much anti like government getting involved in my personal life, and now I'm more Democratic because it's the hypocrisy of the Republican Party in my opinion. I mean, there's some hypocrisies of the Democratic Party too. No, no, both parties have their both moments of being a-holes, but the Republican Party is just like, okay, you don't want government to be involved in your day-to-day life, but you want government to tell other people how they should live and make their own personal decisions on for medical reasons. Okay, like that makes sense to me. And I think I've always been anti like government telling me how to live my life. That's always been me, right? Like if the government has to step in to protect others, I understand that, right? Like speed limits, the masks and COVID, like those I understand because you're protecting others. But even me, I've always been very anti like seatbelts. Like why am I getting fined for wearing a seatbelt when I'm the only risk to life that I have is my own? So let me make my own personal decision
Hmm.
in that, right? Like if I was risking someone else's life, I would understand that's why laws pass to protect others, right? Um but if it's risking my own life and it's decisions that I have to make on my own life, I just never understood why we need government intervention on that and why we need the people to vote for that, right? So I don't know. It's a complicated issue, but I feel like it shouldn't be. Right?
Yeah, but Florida did pass some very solid initiatives in 2018 and in 2020. Like in 2018, um, they got rid of offshore oil drilling, which
Yeah.
was big. And then, I mean, I mean, Florida's really ground zero for climate change and environmental disasters. So getting rid of offshore oil drilling was very big. They also got rid of greyhound dog racing, which and I feel like as time goes on, we as humans have realized that that there's certain practices with animals that are just too cruel, so um, we stop doing them. For example, bullfighting has been on the decline. Like I remember one of my favorite governors was Bill Richardson, ran for president in 2008. He was actually my top choice back then. This was my first election I ever voted in, but when he dropped out, I voted for Barack Obama in the primary. But I know Bill Richardson was like cockfighting. New Mexico was one of the few states where cockfighting was still legal, and Richardson signed a bill outlawing it. But I mean, we in 2008, Massachusetts, we voted on whether or not to outlaw dog racing, and we chose to outlaw it because the argument was, it creates jobs, and like if a dog gets injured, they don't have to race anymore. But a lot of dogs were getting injured, so we voted to get rid of it. And then I remember there was an article like Rhode Island now is the spot with Massachusetts getting rid of dog racing. Like Rhode Island's now the spot where to race dogs. But now Rhode Island's gotten rid of it, and in like pretty much every state, there's only like 5 or 6 states remaining where greyhound dog racing is still like a legal um you know activity that like people are going to greyhound races and watching and like having dogs race and stuff. But Florida got rid of that in 2018.
Yeah.
And then they also gave 1.4 million felons their voting rights back.
Yep.
Although DeSantis signed a law that said they have to pay their court fees first, but still, it's like, and then in 2020, I mean, raising the minimum wage isn't the like ultimate solution to ending poverty, but still, it should be like we're at the point where, especially in Florida, where I think it's more expensive to live compared to some other states, like $15 an hour is should be the at least the starting point, and then 61% of Floridians in 2020 voted to make it the minimum wage 15 an hour. So there is some good stuff going on down there. It's just but still, like we got to in order to really get all of the good stuff, they got to knock the ballot initiative threshold down to 50%.
I agree. Right. Majority wins. I yes, I agree to all that. I mean, Florida, I love Florida. I hope that one day I'll move back to Florida. I'm still registered to vote in Florida, so I did mail-in ballot for this presidency through Florida. Um, so Florida is every. I just feel like Florida every primary election, it just gets this like it, it just gets this shit reputation, right? Um, but the great thing about this country is that every state has a right to kind of make decisions of what's best for their people that live in their state, right? Um, there are certain things that I think the federal government should get involved in, but at the same time, I do believe that um, that states should have their own rights to make their own decisions because every state is different, right? Every state, uh their people are different, and their income is different, and Florida's such a huge tourist state, right? A touristic state with their beaches and hotels and parties and everything like that. That I personally thought that the $15 raising that to was going to actually um hurt and make it more expensive. Um, but again, that's if you majority wins, majority votes, and the majority wins, right? I'm always going to respect that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I saw it as like, I mean, like raising the minimum wage because I feel like the prices increased prior to and its wages weren't keeping up. So that's why I was supporting I was happy when Florida passed that,
Well, no, for sure. I
but
think obviously, especially post pandemic, right? You have a lot of New York and Californians move to Florida. They're earning New York and California wages while working remotely from Florida, and so a lot of these landowners, landlords, and started increasing the rents just ridiculously. Like the rent increased from 2019 through 2021. It was like 200%. Like it was like a ridiculous amount because now you have these people making, again, from these two states that the wages are way higher because it's a higher cost of living. Now living in a state that's a lower cost of living, and that's why wages are low in Florida. And the wages have not kept up since the increase in cost of living. And so I agree that something needed to be done. I just don't know if that was the solution because at the end of the day, right, we're a capitalist country. We're all about making money in businesses. So if businesses have to pay their employees more, what do they need to do to subsidize that? They need to charge more, right? And so they only pass on wages to the customer. Right. So it's just a very vicious circle. Yeah, your minimum wage increases, but now you're paying more in when you go out to eat. Now you're paying more at the grocery store. Now you're paying. All right. So it's like I think we should look at other solutions besides just increasing the minimum wage, but that's like rent control maybe, right? Limiting how much someone can increase your rent every single year. uh, you know, again, controlling the amount of private equity buying out these homes for ridiculous price and outpricing everybody else in the market. I just feel like that we could help kind of the cost of living more than just increasing the minimum wage. I feel like increasing the minimum wage is just kind of almost like a political stunt. Like it just sounds good, it sounds nice, but at the end of the day, if you increase the minimum wage, it's like every year in my job I get a 4% increase, but inflation goes up 5%. So am I really getting an increase? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
so it's a little it's complicated, but that's just that's my opinion on that.
Hmm. Well, it's been great having this conversation. It's now it's time for the Patriots and the Dolphins to square off.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
All right, you're a Patriots fan, right? If I remember
Yep.
correctly.
And I knew the people didn't expect the Patriots to be that good this year. Drake May has a lot of is our silver lining and our bright spot because he's definitely the future. But I'm surprised at the Dolphins. What's going on?
I mean, it's the Dolphins are an interesting team this year, right? Because Tua went down, and you saw the weakness. Once Tua went down, now people start to realize, holy shit, like Tua's actually that good that he elevated the team that much. But I think it has to do a lot of coaching too. Like I love McDaniels, love him to death. I really do think he's the future. But man, some of his decision making is a bit questionable, and his lack of experience has really shown a little bit in his decision making, So I personally, I don't think Tua's our guy. Like, I don't think Tua's gonna take us to the promised land. But he's definitely the best option we have now. So I'm definitely gonna root for the guy. And I'm curious to know, what do you think about the Patriots coach? What's his name?
Mayo.
Mayo. Yeah. What?
When we were 1-6, I was thinking like I don't think Mayo's ready to be a head coach yet, but
Yeah.
he said we need to be more physical, and we've definitely gotten like since then we've definitely gotten more physical. I feel like, and we got some solid wins against the Jets and um the we were um
He has some solid
Uh,
wins this year and overall. Like the Patriots are definitely better than they were last year.
yeah, I'm actually I gotta look, I can't believe I gotta look this up. We beat so when we beat the Jets, that was in a very close game, and then we beat um we played a close game against the Titans and lost, but we beat the Bears 19-3. That's when our defense sacked Caleb Williams like 9
That's right.
times. So that's when I was like, all right, Mayo definitely I think is growing as a coach right now. And then we put up we put up a good fight against the Rams last week. Just came up short. But I think Mayo should get at least another year to see if he can if he could keep building from the ground up. It's usually the magic number is 3. If like with new head coaches, if they entering year 3, that should be the year. If they took over a team that was poor and they had 2 below 500 seasons, usually year 3 is the standard where it's time for them to they've been in the building for you know for a good amount
Yeah.
of time, and it's time to take a team that you've had for in year 3 to the playoffs. And if a coach can't do it in year 3, that's when it's time to part ways.
You guys haven't played the Bills yet, right?
No,
No. So I think if you guys win at least one of those two games against the Bills, that would be really like showing like there's potential there, right? Like for sure.
yeah, and actually the one of those games is the last game of the year, so like the Bills might be like resting starters at that point, but still, if we could beat them even when they're resting starters, it'll be a good send off and a good
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a good like building for tomorrow moment.
All right, so who do you think is gonna win today?
I I'm gonna go with you guys beat us the first time around, and
But barely.
it's always tough to sweep a team. I think, and I mean Drake May's really got our offense going, so I'm gonna go with the Patriots.
Well, how close?
I think it'll be I think off Drake May's really got our offense going, and then Tua. I think if Tua can be play his A game and stuff, I actually think it'll be like a multiple touch. Each team scores multiple touchdowns,
Yeah, I agree.
and it'll be like maybe Patriots by like 3.
Yeah, I was thinking like 23-20 or maybe like 24-23, like something like super close like that for sure. Obviously, I'm gonna go for the Dolphins, especially Tua has been kind of lighting it up the last couple of weeks. But I think the first time around Tua was injured, so and we barely beat you guys. So now with Tua back, I'm pretty confident we'll win today, but we'll see.
And it'll be a great sports story too if Tua can keep going in his career and not get any more concussions and like kind of prove to like it's kind of like with Gronk, and when he went down for like the third or fourth time in 2013, everybody was like, is he going to continue with his career? But he did, and like it's like you can't. There's only so much you can do to prevent injuries, but it's a mix of your personal training plus sports science. And like I feel
Yeah,
like, back in the 80s, a torn ACL used to be the end of someone's career. Now,
that's
like
true.
people tear the ACLs, but and they're out for the season, but then they
They're
come
right
back
back.
and like and are better, sometimes arguably better than they were before. I mean, I'll never forget in 2011 when Adrian Peterson tore his ACL, and then in 2012 he won the MVP.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
he just complete. I mean, MVPs normally quarterbacks. It's been nicknamed MVP QB,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
no, but Peterson. I mean, but like Gronk showed that like not only did the only significant time he missed after that injury he wasn't with the Pats when they beat the Falcons in that Super Bowl, but he was solid all of 14, 15, 17, and 18. And then after he retired in 18, it was like, all right, he had a great career. But then he came back and had those 2 more in that Super Bowl when Brady's
Hmm.
Bucks beat Mahomes' Chiefs. Gronk had like 2 touchdowns in that game.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I
No,
mean, it's
I
like
agree.
if Tua can like find a way, he's got to do a lot of like there's I'm sure there's certain like brain training you can do to try to like keep to offset the damage a concussion does. And maybe they could like add some like additional padding to his helmet. But if he can like play at least like several more seasons. Like it'll be an inspiring story to all athletes who have been concussed.
You know, this is my conspiracy theorist in me a little bit, but when Tua got that injury at the beginning of the season, I actually think he might have faked it. That's just my personal conspiracy theory, only because people kind of tend to forget he threw like 3 interceptions that game.
So he wanted to have an excuse for why
So
he
he
played
wanted
poor.
to like, you know what, maybe I just need not have this be like my defining moment in this season, right? So, but that's just my conspiracy theory, you know, because after that he looked fine. Like he was on the sideline, he looked fine. But again, I get it. I've had my fair share of concussions while playing football, so it's not one of those things that you can see clearly, right? Um, but I heard that after that injury, I mean, he was out in concussion protocol for like 3 weeks, but he was out still partying and like doing all these things, and I'm like, dude, no, like, there's no way in hell like you're doing all of that while on concussion protocol. But it is what it is. Again, I'm not the biggest Tua fan, but he's led us to multiple winning seasons and playoff. Even though we haven't won a single playoff game with him yet, but I still got hope that him and McDaniels will do something. So we'll see.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, actually, I just got my. I have Patrick Mahomes on three of my fantasy. I have three fantasy teams. Two out of three of them I drafted Mahomes, and
You've
he
been
just
doing
got a 30.
bad fantasy wise this year.
Yeah, I'm disappointed. And
So bad. I have him on one of my teams, yeah, and he's just not. I have him and wow, Travis Kelsey, and they both just been terrible. But you know who I picked up last week and blew up? Bo Nix.
yeah, he's been a good story this year. Like, because I mean, Denver is really they actually have the Denver Broncos have this second active longest playoff drought. They have not made the playoffs since they won the Super Bowl
Mm,
in 2015. And it's like, I mean, they put a lot of investment in Russell Wilson, trying to bring them back to the playoffs. But Wilson's actually doing better as a Steeler than he did as a Bronco the past two
yeah,
years. And then, but yeah, Bo Nix. I mean, the Denver's defense has been pretty solid. Bo Nix is playing well, and Sean Payton. He had a great tenure with the Saints, and now he's showing he's having he could have a great tenure with the Broncos as well.
yep. So we'll see. All right, man. I'm gonna go watch the game.
All right, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Anytime, man. Anytime you need a talking head, let me know.
Definitely.
All right.
All right, I'll catch you later.
Sounds good, man. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.